We are so excited to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Mark Drummond, to the stage. Dr. Drummond is a successful entrepreneur, inventor, and technical manager who has scaled and successfully exited numerous startups and was responsible for building a brand new team at Apple focused on AI and machine learning tools for building characters in mixed reality. Mark was on the founding team for Siri and has managed machine learning projects with multi-million-dollar operating budgets. Welcome, Dr. Drummond.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say thanks first to the EDCO folks for making this possible. And my goal is in about half an hour to give you a little bit of an overview of AI, more than you get from the current headlines in the news. This quote gives you a sense of what I think about ChatGPT and large language models and the transformer architecture and neural networks that support it. These are pretty fabulous things. We are not there. We're not done. These are nice incremental steps. We're not on the edge of a transformation. We're not all going to be transported into space by aliens for recognizing the genius of some architecture. These are good things. They're incremental things, but we're not done. So I felt the need to quote Paul Simon there. So I'm going to start with, I think we skipped it's just an entire slide missing. Well, let's just keep going. So I'm going to start with a story, a cast of characters. There's 4 people. And it's in the 1800s, and you think, why would the 1800s feature in a talk about AI? Well, you'll see in a second. So first we have Lord Byron. Actually, there's a number of slides missing. There's a number of slides missing here. We will not have a cast of 4 characters. And it'll be a surprise to all of us exactly how many show up here. I'm not sure why that is. Lord Byron was the father to Ada Lovelace. Ada is going to come up in a second. And mostly in this, he was a hero to the Greeks, and he lived a short life because he died fighting for the Greeks for reasons that I don't understand. But he hosted a memorable dinner party in Geneva. The person that we're supposed to see here first is Charles Babbage. Charles Babbage was an inventor in the 1800s, and he built what is now considered the first technically correct digital computer, made out of brass, out of gears. It was programmed with punched cards, really. The punched card insight came from the Jacquard loom. In the loom, a card had holes in it, and the holes, when it was inserted to the machine, dictated which pins would fall. If there was card, no pin would fall. If there was a hole, a pin would fall. And it was the whole pattern in the card that determined what the loom produced in terms of the weave. So he took that idea, and he turned it into an idea for programming a computer. The first one was called the difference engine. He built that. It worked. And it'll be a surprise to all of us. Ada, she is there. Excellent. She was a mathematician, particularly impressive at that time because women were not allowed to be formally educated in anything, never mind math. So she was self-taught, connected with Babbage, became, by all accounts, a first-rate mathematician, and she is considered the world's first programmer. In fact, you may know of a programming language called Ada. This is where it comes from. It's Ada Lovelace. So she wrote programs with punched cards for the difference engine. The analytical engine was never completely built. Actually, just as a quick aside, if you go to the Science Museum in London or you go to the Computer History Museum in Mountain View in California, they have fully reconstructed versions of the difference engine. It is beautiful. It's amazing, and you can see how the punched cards worked. So, world's first programmer. And now we come to Mary Shelley. Many of you will know from like junior high reading, she wrote Frankenstein, right? Which is widely considered the world's first science fiction novel. All right, how do these things all fit together? Well, at Lord Byron's estate in Geneva in the early 1800s, they played this game, which was common in Victorian times, which someone threw out a prompt. Not a prompt to ChatGPT, but a prompt. And it's widely considered that the prompt was something like this: how might we build something that thinks? And of course, we bring our biases and our intuitions and our tools to the question. And what's really interesting to me is Mary Shelley said, take a bunch of previously thinking meat, bolt it together, apply it a lot of electricity, which is, of course, where the more power Igor, or more power Igor, depending on which version of Frankenstein you like, comes from. And maybe we could make a thinking machine by taking something that was thinking and sticking it back together. Well, Ada Lovelace had a slightly more sophisticated interpretation, which was maybe we could write a program that would think. Just consider that for a second. The world's first programmer was also the world's first person to think about programming computers to emulate intelligence. That's kind of wild to me. So she thought about this a lot in the 1800s, and she came up with what is now called the Lady Lovelace objection to AI. I will read it. She said that a computer program has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. It can follow analysis, but has no power of anticipating any analytical relations or truths. In the 1800s, she was thinking about the limits of programming and the limits of computation with respect to what you can build. That's astounding. Now, I disagree with this, and I will happily disagree over a beer with anyone. I think she's wrong, but that doesn't matter. She was thinking about this, and she had a very good argument. All right, we skip forward into modern AI. This is widely considered the birth of modern AI. In 1956, John McCarthy, later a professor at Stanford, brought together a bunch of people, and he said, let's assemble and discuss and proceed on the basis of the conjecture that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can, in principle, be so precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. It's a bold statement. I also think it's wrong because it says simulate. Does a frog simulate thinking because its neurons operate differently than me? I think the frogs think frog-like thoughts. I think Mark-like thoughts. We're built differently. It's not simulating me. I'm not simulating it. It is what it is. But let's skip past that. That's another beer if we want to get there. It's going to be a long night. And then just want to point out that in 1959, Samuel wrote a program which was considered a darn good checker player. Now, no competition was ever held to prove that it was the best in the world, but really competent checker players at the time sat down, played this thing, and were beaten by it. That's an amazing thing. Can you imagine with a computer of that era writing that program? What he innovated on were two kinds of learning. In the work that he did, he called it memoization. Nowadays, we'd call it caching. Basically, you look at something and you say, I've seen this before. I've been to this movie before. I know how it ends. I don't need to do the work again. I've already done that work. That's pretty cool. And it would also play itself in its own mind. Do computers have minds? It had a program. It would play against itself to get better so that when it played a person, it would be better than it would have been had it not played against itself. So it's running simulations in its own head to improve at the game. This is in 1959. We as a species are not just turning our thoughts to AI today. So this is a big topic, and I just want to communicate one aspect of it to you. It will inform a lot of what happens in the next 10 to 20 years. In the 80s and 90s, there was this big, almost religious debate between what you call symbolists and connectionists. So symbolists leaned into algebra. They leaned into first-order logic. They leaned into writing down facts and then building an inference engine, which you could crank a handle on, and it would produce more facts from those facts. So basically, the symbolist style of AI says, take something that you know how to do, something that you can articulate, write down those rules, and then we can automate it. The connectionist approach says, there's a number of things that we're good at that we don't know why we're good at. We can't even explain how we do them. When I look at my grandmother, how do I recognize that it's her? How do I recognize the letter or number 0? How do I know that that truck is coming at me and I should get out of the way? These are really hard things to automate. So symbolists had a run at representing knowledge and representing the rules that surround that knowledge. And most of the practical work was so-called symbolist. And it's important to understand in today's environment that it's partly a revenge of the nerds kind of scenario where finally connectionists are having their day. And one of the things that you're going to see going forward is a reunification of these, and you're going to have so-called neuro-symbolic architectures, and that's going to be the big innovation in the next 5 to 10 years. So there were a lot of great applications here. I worked on some of them, let's say like scheduling. Let's imagine that you got a fab, which is a semiconductor manufacturing facility. And the question is, what wafers do you release and when, and what pieces of equipment do you do them on and when? It's like, I don't know. That was me. Well, you can automate that, and you can put a bunch of rules in a system, and it can do kind of goal-directed simulation. And if not optimal, it's going to be at least better than some person going, I don't know. And a lot of these systems were built, supply chain optimization. I got factories all over the world. What do I make, where, in what quantities? How do I ship it, to where, under what constraints, so that it arrives in a warehouse or on someone's doorstep, subject to certain timing and cost constraints. These are things that we know how to do. We can write them down, and we did it a lot, and it worked extremely well. Product configuration. Oh, if you get the 4-cylinder engine, you can get this transmission, but not that one. The 6-cylinder engine comes with this transmission. You can't get that wheel size with this. These are all rules. We know it. We built these things, so we can write these down. We can automate them really effectively. Now, just as a quick historical note, John McCarthy, the guy who convened that conference that I mentioned in 1956, also invented Lisp, which is really arguably the world's oldest programming language. Technically, it stands for List Processing Language, but if you've ever seen a program, you will understand why some people roll their eyes and say it stands for Lost in Superfluous Parentheses, because it is ugly in the extreme. But it's also kind of beautiful, mathematically. And then to extricate people from the mud of low-level programming languages, lots of knowledge representation tools came about. Key, which is the knowledge engineering environment, ART, KnowledgeCraft, Ops5. These are all systems for letting people who know manufacturing or who know short interval scheduling write down what they know so that the system can do it. Now, this is not a blotch of bits on the screen. This is actually an algorithm, A star. You say, what's an A star? Well, A star goes back before the 80s, but it is the route planning algorithm that is in your phone and in your car, and it's the thing when you say, I am here, and I need to get there, and I don't want to cross the bridge. It is the algorithm that gets you there. So we all use this kind of AI all the time. The problem is, if we know how to do it, it's not AI. It's only AI until we know how to do it. So a lot of these things just get swept under the rug in history because you say, well, they're easy. You know, they weren't easy, and they're still valuable. It's still AI. So I had the honor of working on systems that sequence all the American assets on Mars. We built systems for the Mars Explorer rovers, which is Spirit and Opportunity, and the Mars Science Lab, which is called something else. Doesn't really matter here. The important thing, just sort of looking at these pictures going, wow, they're out of scale, because this here, the MER rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, about the size of a card table, and the Mars Science Lab is the size of an SUV. And this flat plane here is a solar cell. So these things are driven by solar electric. It's batteries charging. And the Mars Science Lab is driven by what's called an RTG. It's not a nuclear reactor in the traditional sense. It's a chunk of plutonium-232, which is just hot. And if you package it in the right way, you can get a current out of something that's just hot. So we build these systems, all rule-based, which take a scientific objective like, I would really like to have the rock abrasion tool on that rock at this angle, subject to blah, blah, blah constraints. And you think about it differently if you're driving a solar-powered vehicle, because when the sun goes down, all the electronics freeze, and you have to keep enough power in the battery overnight so that you can keep the circuits warm. And that's not a problem for the Mars Science Lab. It's got a chunk of plutonium in there. It's just always warm. Things don't freeze. So the rules that we put together are different for the different vehicles. And it worked great. No deep learning involved. There was a lot of machine learning also in the 80s and 90s. The wonderfully named, I need a pause, Iterative Dichotomizer 3. There's a reason you haven't heard of it. And support vector machines, explanation-based learning, come up with by a friend of mine, Steve Minton. Evolutionary algorithms, you've also heard of genetic algorithms. These are all pretty fabulous inventions, but they all require manual feature identification. They all require the person who's building the system to say, here are the distinctions in the world that matter. I'm going to give you those distinctions, and then you can learn over top of that. Here's where we come into modern deep learning. This is a huge but simple idea. You all look at this. I guarantee you there's not a person in this room who doesn't know that that's 504192. How do you know that? I don't know. You were taught it. Maybe you're like me, you were hit with a big stick if you got it wrong. But there's ways to build computer systems that learn these things from a crap ton of examples. So let's look at this. This is a table of a bunch of handwritten digits. Say in the top left, the number is 0. Well, what if we had the number, well, we had that image. I'm just going to call them bitmaps. Let's imagine these are bitmaps. And each one is labeled. So we get that loopity thing, and we get a label. This is the number 0. Next one over, we get that thing, and we get, this is the number 4. So we have a bunch of labeled training examples. What could we do with that? Well, the big insight here is you could build a neural network that has input layers, hidden layers, and output layers such that you push in the samples and you hold the output given the label. So we're given this thing, I don't know what it is, but we're told it's a 5. Now, let's not worry about what the network does just now. It takes things and it combines data in certain ways defined by the semantics of these nodes. We need to find, roughly speaking, weights for this network so that provided this input, it produces that output. Now, for the technically minded among us, you see this is what's called a one-hot vector. It's a vector, it's 0 to 9. It's one hot because it can only be one thing in that vector. It can't be both the number 3 and the number 7. It's going to be 3 or 7. So one hot just means one of these things is going to be picked out. So we provide the image as input, the classification is output, and the question is, how do you adjust the weights in that network so that reliably, when you provide an input, you get the right output? I want you to hear this because this is the core of it, and it's kind of magic. Stochastic gradient descent. Well, stochastic is Greek, means random. Gradient, there's a slope. Descent, we're going down a slope. It's actually super, super simple. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that network, and we're going to keep looping through it, changing the weights until the outputs are right. What does it mean for an out to be right? Well, we've got the input bitmap, say it's 4, and we get the output, and it's not right. There's an error. There's an error between what we want to see and what we do see. We want to reduce that error to be 0. So we're reducing an error, and how do we do it? We hill climb. Imagine that the error between your current output and the target output is the height that you are on a hill. And you look around, you want to go down, because down is better. Down is towards 0. Down is towards sea level. So you take a step down, and you take a step down. Well, you might end up in a little valley that is not at 0. And that's where the stochastic comes in. You will, with some probability, choose a next step that's worse than where you are. That's it. That's all of modern deep learning in one slide. Now, why does it work? It's not clear. Like the universe is kind to us. Or maybe my own theory is we only exist as humans because our brains are able to do something like this. And if it was not possible, we wouldn't be here. So the fact that we're here means this is computable using these kinds of techniques. That's my personal theory. That's another beer. Another beer. So why is this deep learning? Well, it's because multiple layers, input, hidden layers, not just one, could be many, and then the output layer. Now here's the really cool thing. The lower layers turn out to learn features in the input, and progressively higher layers learn how to combine them. So it might be, I need to do, in venture pitches, this is called puppetware. So I have this module which passes them out. Yeah. So we might have a low-level feature, which is a vertical line, and another one, which is another line. And then you learn above that if they touch like this, that's a key feature. And then up and up and up. It's very clever. So higher levels learn feature combinations. And the brilliant thing here is it's all automated. You just provide, you need to be careful with the statistics of training and evaluation. And you get into terms like precision and recall to make sure that you're not overfitting. And if your data set drifts, then it's non-stationary. So it's not trivial, but the core of it is not complicated. It always bothers me when people say, oh, this is really complicated. It's just not. So these are bitmaps. This is structural data. People worked way back in the 80s and the 90s on time-varying data. What's time-varying data? Like language. Language is a sequence of words. Audio, audio in. It's a sequence of sounds and frequencies. So people have worked on recurrent neural networks, RNNs, my favorite, goofiest term of all time, long, short-term memory, LSTMs, which are ways of putting neural networks to work on temporal sequences. And those worked okay, but they were all blown away in 2017 by a paper from Google, which Google itself ignored, called Attention is All You Need. And the idea here is simple, but really subtle. And I encourage you, and if you follow up and I send you some links, there's some things that really explain this. But the idea is use machine learning to learn what combination of things in the input actually matters in getting a good answer. And if you do that correctly, you get this so-called transformer neural net architecture. Not a transformer that takes 110 volts and gives you 12. It's a transformer because it takes an input and it transforms it in parallel over time. And that's why these things work so well on GPUs, and that's why your NVIDIA stock has done so well, because it all parallelizes beautifully. It's not a sequential computation. It all happens all in parallel. Very cool. So large language models, or LLMs, use transformers to do their magic. You say, okay, what is this magic? Why does it work so well? All right, text is a long sequence of words. Not technically words, they're really tokens, but let's not worry about that. We'll just call them words for now. And an LLM is just a predictor of the n+1th word. Given n, or nth in here, given n-1 words, it says, what's the next most likely word given all the evidence I have, which is basically everything the human race has ever written because they've crawled the entire web. So they have very good statistics for this. Now this varies, the input window can be different, but at one point in time it was 3,000 words or tokens. So all the LLM is doing is saying, given those 3,000 words, what's the most likely 3,001st word? That's it. And you say, really? I can have a conversation with this thing and it feels like it's an intelligent creature? That is it. It's just statistics of word likelihood given some context. It's astounding that it works so well. And why does it work? No one knows. People who tell you they know are liars. They don't know. There's a new, and this I find both exciting and really disappointing, empirical experimental methodology surrounding these things. Just think about it for a second. It's like, imagine we built bridges, and we said, why has that one stayed up? I don't know. You drive across it. No, I'm not going across it. You go across it. Well, let's send enough people across until it falls over. No, I don't think so. Like, we know why these bridges stay up. Whereas here we're building these things, and we're saying, why'd that work? I don't know. So we're like doing computational versions of X-rays for these things to say, well, I don't know, you pull that thing out and see what happens. Or it reminds me of the old, what's that? Oh, I shouldn't do this on the fly. What's that movie? Buckaroo Banzai in the 8th Dimension. You remember that at the beginning? Then he's doing the brain surgery. He says, don't tug on that. You don't know where it goes. It's exactly that. Don't tug on that. So moving into risks. It really bothered me to say, well, the species is done. I saw Terminator. I know how this story is. No, just stop. Now, you can say launch on warning, and I worked on things related to this, where a computer decides whether or not to launch a nuke. I think that's just a bad idea. But if you're going to hook computers up to launching nukes, you should be using this stuff, not the old symbolic rule-based systems. Ooh, look, a flock of geese. Launch. Sunlight reflecting off that cloud in a way that I hadn't seen before. Launch. These are not made-up examples, right? We've de-escalated over many decades critical launch sequences where computers said, go. And people had the moxie to intervene and say, I don't think so. So if you're going to do launch on warning, for God's sakes, do it using one of these systems, not the old school thing. But I recommend not hooking computers up to nukes anyway. So I don't think that's an existential risk. Unemployment risks, yeah, I don't mean to understate it, but these are generational things. So if you're a welder in Detroit in the 70s and you had a very nice paying job on a production line, and someone came along with a robot that could weld better than you, that sucked. But if you worked for Ford and they looked after you, or they retired you early to give you a payout, these are manageable sorts of things. The invention of the printing press by Gutenberg put a lot of typesetters out of work. Do we train our kids today how to be typesetters? Of course not. So these are generational things. They come and go. They're not easy, but I think as a species we can manage them. This, and was it Kurt? Kurt at the outset was speaking to this. This is a real risk. I'd like to buy that house. No. Why? No? Did I say no? I meant no. Am I too white, too black, too old, too young? Training to female? What is it? What do you not like about me that made you say no? We can't tell you, just no. That is a serious risk. Or police. Oh, we're going to pull you in for questioning. Why? Can't tell you. An alarm went off somewhere. How about some explanation for that? Can't do that. That's a real risk. So, moving towards the close, you'll be happy. This is not going to be the rapture. We're not going to be taken by aliens. LLMs are really cool. The transformer architecture is a piece of computational mathematical beauty. When you get your head around it, you go, oh, and then you move on. It's really nice, but it's not everything. We've got a lot of progress to make. This drives me a little crazy. You hear people say this all the time. More data, more compute. A city the size of Bend that is nothing but chips and server farms, and then we'll have it. It's like, no, you won't. No, you won't. There's so many problems. These are weird little statistical traces through language, and culturally, we're led to believe that something that can speak must be smart, because we're used to people that are smart speaking well. These are, maybe heard the term stochastic parrots. They're not smart. They can't do analogical reasoning. They can't do temporal reasoning. They can't do planning. So we are not there. We got a lot of work to do. So they're cool. If you're familiar with Kuhn, famous philosopher of science, wrote this book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. We have normal science. We have revolutionary science. This is a revolution. Boom. Step into a whole new space. And then we paper it out, and we fill it out, and then we run into problems. And those problems will cause new innovations. So we are not there. It's a great revolution, but it's not the end of the road. So some recommendations. If you work in a business that deals with text or images, you should be thinking about how to use this stuff, because it is life-changing. It can be business-changing. It's dirt cheap. You can start experimenting today. You don't even have to tell anyone. You just start playing with it. At a certain point, you'll start getting ideas. Just go out and talk to your colleagues and your employees for how LLMs can be used. Draw for yourself, though, a 2x2 matrix. Say, high risk, low risk, low cost, high cost. Go for the low cost, high impact. So high impact, low cost, high cost. Go for the high impact, low cost quadrant first. It always astounds me how many people go for the most expensive and lowest payoff thing they can find to begin with. Just organize your thinking around that. And I would encourage you, don't say, how can this technology allow me to get rid of people? Say instead, how can this technology let me take my existing people and make them better? Make them more customer support, improve my customer experience. Think about growth, not reduction, and you'll be on an interesting path. And when people talk to you about deep learning, woo, transformers, LLMs, say, I know what those are. They're all based on, and here's your great party line, stochastic gradient descent, and you have just ended the conversation. So if you want any of these resources, thanks. Drop me a line. I have like 20, 30 things. There are videos and tutorials, and some are nice high-level journalistic things that are just fun to read. Some are like deep dives in why transformers work the way they work. And apart from that, thank you.
Dr. Drummond, this was awesome. How about another round of applause? Oh, we'll do some Q&A. I want to compliment you on how accessible you made this talk. And I also want to say there were times when you were going really into it and I was like, oh yes, but inside it was blank. So I'm sure there will be some questions. We are also 3 beers deep in your talk, so
Those are promissory beers.
we're in a situation. I'm curious. This question's way out there, but I'm curious if I'm sure there's people trying to apply some of this to Alzheimer's dementia patients. Is there anyone specific that you're kind of interested in or hearing about or curious about?
So let me answer that in a very political way by avoiding it completely. No, I'm gonna do a detour, which might make you think I have one of those conditions, but I will come back to it. I'm a big fan of the idea of AI being a computational orthotic. That is, if I lose my hand in a threshing machine because I'm throwing bales of hay, first I see a surgeon, then I see a physiotherapist, and finally I see an occupational therapist who comes up with some fitments for my hand so that I can still, against all experience, throw bales of hay. So they look at what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, and they build systems around my perimeter that help me do what I want to do in life. And there's some things that you might be able to automate, but I don't want them automated. And there's other things that I do want automated. So I'm really encouraging people, when they embrace these tools, to think of them as cognitive orthotics and ask people, human-centered, say, what do you want done? How can we help you? And I'm not familiar with any specific research in Alzheimer's, but I think it's going to come.
Yeah, that was a beautiful response. Thank you. Questions from the audience? Yes, all the way in the back. She
Thank you.
absolutely loved your talk. And she's on fire with AI. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So she. Oh, God, I want to answer this question. Okay, so she asked ChatGPT, what are people good for? It responded by spitting back out her program. So she's asking to you, in the face of all of this incredible technology, what are people good for? And to go one step further, how do we leverage the people, the culture, the work stuff? How am I doing? Pretty good? Well, what is the work culture? Okay, what would be the most dynamic work culture combining people with AI?
Right.
Yeah.
I say don't automate it because you can, and this might be a very pointy-headed way of thinking about things, but if you think about the Gene Roddenberry world of Star Trek, what's happened? Energy is free, food is free, education is free. What do people do? They better themselves. They engage with other humans. They write poetry that makes them happy. Not because they're going to be better some machine, because it fulfills them. They build relationships with other people. They do these human things, not because they're better or worse than a machine, because they make them feel good and they make them contribute to a society. So we don't have free energy, we don't have fusion, but I tend to think of the automation that these tools represent as feeding into that way of thinking about things. So don't automate it just because you can. Like, I might not be a particularly good date from my partner, but I don't want to automate that. I want to take her out. Right.
So oof.
Yeah,
She's pointing. I want to give a round of applause for your answer because that was incredibly beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
She's pointing out.
Okay.
Yes, I think you have to buy us all a beer
Okay.
now, actually, ma'am. She says, people dream, they create. But like, is the human mind going extinct? Like, we have to move beyond looking to the past for the answers, which, yeah, we really do. But I think that young people are doing something different. So, what response?
I guess I have two answers. One is, this technology is really, really simple compared to you. You have reflection and analogy, and you can solve problems and think about ways and things that none of this machinery can. And think about the human brain. 3 pounds of fat. I'm going to point at my own head. Fat. The brain is fat, 3 pounds. It takes about 20 watts to run. And it can do the equivalent of 12 exaflops operations. That's, what is that? 12 zeros per second. So that many floating point operations per second in a 20-watt, 3-pound lump of fat. We do not know how to do that. You are special and unique, and maybe in 100 years we will have computers that can replicate that, but not for a long time. And even then, I think there's something special about being a person that will make us valuable.
Yeah, I agree. ChatGPT can't give you a lightning-fast, comedy-based response, can it?
Oh.
Haven't seen that happen.
It could do much better.
Come on. Nobody's laughing at ChatGPT. Okay, yes, you, sir.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Incredibly inspiring.
Right.
I have a 7-year-old who's super interested in Legos and
Love it.
art and
Yeah.
the world around him, and I want to give him the information,
Yeah.
exposure to these powerful tools in appropriate ways. How do we think about the next generation?
Yeah, that's great.
Kids who are going to emerge into consciousness of the world with this stuff, and I'm a believer in it, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you. He has a 7-year-old who is interested in Legos and is very engaged, and he wants to know about AI. And he's wondering what your thoughts are on how to expose him and show him this and what you think the next generation is going to do.
I thought, by the way, you were repeating this because I was hard of understanding. and then I realized, oh, no, it's... okay, right. Because I heard him, you know.
You are doing great.
Okay, thank you.
You are doing
Thank
great.
you, yeah. I'll answer Herbert now. What I would say is find things that your son really likes, like Lego, and find ways to use these tools to engage that excitement. So, for example, you could show something that he likes, like a baseball glove, and say, let's make this out of Lego. How would we do that? And show him the tools, but now you can take your iPhone, you can do a 3D photogrammetry scan, you build a computational solid model, you could load that in, you say to one of these tools, rebuild that for me in Lego. And then you can take that and you go to the Lego people and they will print you those bricks and it comes back and then you can assemble it and you go, holy cow, I just rebuilt my Lego, my baseball glove in Lego. So I would say find things that excite him and find ways to take that excitement and channel it through some of these tools.
Brilliant. Okay, are we okay to take another question? Yeah, okay, I'm gonna take another question. I'm going rogue. Okay, I'm taking another question. It's gonna be you. What does the front line of world stage look like?
Thank you. I didn't even have to ask you to. So World Stage is a company that I'm working on from here in Bend. Our thesis is that augmented reality is pretty cool, but it's too hard to build fairly crappy experiences. So at Apple, I led the team that built that thing that ships with the Apple Vision Pro. It's called Experience Dinosaurs. We spent a lot of money, many, many months, worked with Jon Favreau to bring that to life. I want to create something that allows a 12-year-old boy to say happy birthday to his mom with a puppy that she looks at through her iPhone, appears on her kitchen table, is sitting beside a little inkwell, looks at her, stumbles into the inkwell, and then with its feet writes out happy birthday, Mom, on the table. And I want to make it possible for that kid to do it by just typing in happy birthday, Mom, and hitting send. That's what World Stage is.
Let's take another question. Ooh. Okay, this. This is fun. This could be like a whole graphic novel, I think. Okay, we're going to use AI to start to outpace traditional thinking, and how do you see that playing out in in politics or in, you said government, or, as it goes. Purely subjective.
What do you mean by so traditional thinking, it's been clear for many, many decades that we as creatures of reason are not particularly good at finding optimal solutions to things. So with respect to the stresses and strains in a bridge, or how buildings respond to wind and earthquakes, we're not particularly good. So we set up tools to make us better at that. So that's traditional thinking, and then there's these closed form sorts of analyses tools. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about? I want to make sure I understand the...
You spoke about 300
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of room for... So if you look at what Google through DeepMind did in terms of predicting protein folding, that was an unsolved problem for decades. No one knew how to do it. Now they've basically predicted every protein and how it folds. They just know that. I think that's an amazing thing. If we start to map out human genome, the way your body works and mine could be quite different, and a drug that would be super beneficial for you could kill me, and vice versa. The individual activation pathways for different people are quite different. So I think this style of reasoning at scale offers up, for an example, way outside traditional thinking, personalized medicine of a type that we've never even had the resources to consider. So you spit in a tube, and they say, oh, you have a predilection for this. We will manufacture a vaccine for you, which causes your body's own immune system to preemptively strike against that thing. We couldn't have done that before, so that's way outside traditional thinking, but it's a much bigger question than I know how to answer.
That'd be like a whole six-pack.
Done.
Okay. Wow. How about a round of applause? I know, we could go all night.